Chapter 21. Pong and Samkit stood in the atrium of a cavernous building. The house's wooden walls and floor were as dark and slick as the inside of a turtle's den. Strands of violet orbs swung overhead. Pong counted 6 stories, each one open to the central hall on the ground floor. "Somebody here told me this used to be a government building where the old governor worked," said Samkit. "You know, before the fire." Pong nodded as he looked around. That would explain the blackened color and the building's strange layout. Each floor was ringed with rooms that must have once been offices. The great fire had burned away the entrances to each room, leaving behind a warren of square cubbies. Just like the rest of Chitana, the mud house was packed with people. They leaned over the railings on every floor, chatting to their neighbors or hanging laundry up on lines strung between the orb lights. Children played games on the stairs. On the ground floor, people sat at rows of long tables, eating or studying together over stacks of books. Pong could smell the sizzle of food cooking back in Mark's restaurant. His empty stomach gurgled. "Clothes first," said Samkit, reading his mind. "My room's this way." Pong followed him up the stairs to the 3rd floor, stepping around children who giggled and pointed at his butt. Samkit drew back the curtain of one of the cubby rooms. "Welcome to my humble castle. Make yourself at home." Pong stepped into a room not much bigger than his tiny one back at the temple. There was a mat and a pillow in one corner, and a shelf along one wall covered in coils of wire, tin snips, pliers, and little glass jars filled with sorted pieces of metal. "Go on, take a seat," said Samkit, motioning to the mat. He turned his back to Pong and started rifling through a pile of clothes. No, too short," he said, holding up a pair of pants. "Why do you have to get so tall? We used to be the same size." "We were never the same size," said Pong. "I was always bigger than you." "Had a bigger mouth, you mean," said Samkit. He turned and grinned, tossing the rumpled clothes to Pong. "Here, these should fit. The pants will be too short, but we'll find you some better ones tomorrow." Pong slipped on the shirt and pulled on the baggy pants over his now-dried underwear. The shirt showed his belly button, and the pants bulged around his hips and barely covered his knees. "How do I look?" he asked. "Completely ridiculous." They both laughed, and for a moment it felt as if it had only been 4 hours, not 4 years, since they'd last seen each other. Samkit seemed the same, but also different. He was still scrawny for his age, and his cheeks were still round and chubby, just like Pong remembered from Namwan, but there was something unfamiliar in Samkit's eyes. He looked back at Pong with a sadness that didn't match his happy-go-lucky grin. Samkit ran his hand over his hair, and Pong noticed his friend's tattoo. It had a bright blue line running through the letters and a tiny star, the mark of someone who has been officially released. Not a day had passed at the temple that Pong hadn't prayed for his friend and wished he could know what he was doing. What had it been like after Pong left Namwan? How had Samkit managed? And what did it feel like on the day they opened the gates and let him go free? Now here was Pong's chance to ask his many questions, but he couldn't speak. He looked down at the floor, guilt twisting its way between his ribs. He'd left Samkit behind. What kind of a friend does that? The room felt stuffy, the way it does when people go too long without saying anything, and Samkit rarely went for long without saying anything. He slapped his belly. "Well, I'm starved. And if I'm hungry, you must be double hungry. Let's go down and eat." By the time the boys got downstairs, most of the people sitting in the atrium had cleared away. Samkit went back into Mark's kitchen and came out with dishes of fish meatball soup and fried eggs and scallions over rice. Pong inhaled almost his entire meal before he stopped and held one hand over his mouth. "What's wrong?" asked Samkit. Pong choked down his bite. "I'm not supposed to eat anything until sunrise," he croaked. Samkit looked again at Pong's shaved scalp. A dangerous criminal hiding out in a temple. I don't guess that has anything to do with you. I can explain, started Pong. The weight of his situation fell on him hard. He thought of Father Cham, by now gone from this life, and the temple that he'd never see again. He thought of Nock, her piercing blackbird eyes, and the vengeful way she looked at him before he leaped from the cliff into the water. Oh, Samkit, he whispered, I am in so much trouble. Samkit looked at him. He reached for the jar of dried pepper flakes and sprinkled some into his bowl, then Pong's. Trust me, he said, you're safe here. This is the one place in the city where he eyed Pong's left wrist, doesn't matter. No one here is going to turn you in, and no one from the outside is ever going to find you either. Samkit picked a meatball out of his soup with his chopsticks and held it up to Pong. Go on. You better take it. If you wait till sunrise to eat it, it's going to smell super bad. Pong smiled and took the meatball with his own chopsticks. He turned back to his soup bowl and shut his eyes, willing himself to feel as light as the steam rising into his face. You're safe here. No one is ever going to find you.